I'm Georgia Higley. I'm head of the newspaper section in the Serial and Government Publications Division, and we're the home of the comic book collection. So that's why I'm up here, and I have the fortunate duty to introduce Carol. So I want to welcome everyone to this latest program that we're sponsoring, and this program is celebrating one of our special collections, the comic book collection, and it's really celebrating one piece of that collection, the Spx Collection. And the idea of the Spx Collection goes back to August 2011, when the library signed an agreement with SPX that led to the creation of the collection. As many of you already know, SPX sponsors an annual festival in Bethesda, Maryland, and it gives artists, writers, and publishers of comic art in its multitude of forms the opportunity to meet and exhibit their material. The library acquires independent comics and cartoon art from publishers and creators appearing at the festival, as well as through the annual Ignatz Award winners. And through today's talk, we're actually recognizing the rewards of this agreement, because to date over 5,200 items have come to the library through SPX, and that has been a wonderful boon for us, because of course it is something that probably we would not have received through our traditional means, which is copyright deposit. And the annual talk that we're sponsoring, such as this one today, is always held the Friday before the start of the SPX Festival weekend. So today we're very fortunate to have acclaimed cartoonist, painter, writer, educator, and I'm sure there are a whole lot more occupations I could list, Carol Tyler as this year's speaker. She will be discussing her creative life in Comics to a T, the triumphs and troubles of telling the Tyler story. She's a pioneer of the autobiographical comic genre, and she uses her own experience to kind of tackle issues of human experience with grace, humor, and style. Tyler's works are too many to mention here, but they've appeared in women's comics, where her first works were published, Twisted Sisters, Weirdo, LA Weekly, among many other publications. She has received numerous awards, notably named on the list of the top 100 cartoonists of the century. Tyler's 2015 book, A Soldier's Heart, The Campaign to Understand My World War II Veteran Father, about her dad's trauma for World War II and its impact on her family, exemplifies the autobiographical comic genre that she has really made her own. It received a host of awards and nominations, 11 Eisner Awards, 2 Ignatz nominations, and it was twice a finalist for the LA Times Book Prize. Alex Dubin of the Los Angeles Times Book Review considered it not just Tyler's masterpiece, but arguably one of the 21st century's best comics. Others have compared it favorably to Art Spiegelman's Mouse. Her latest book, Fab Four Mania, I love that name, details her personal obsession with the Beatles, and her concert-going experience is told from her 13-year-old self's point of view. As she once described it, it's me reconnecting with the person I was before life came along. So before I turn the podium over to Carol, I just want to point out that we've got a display of Carol's works, including both Soldier's Heart and Fab Four Mania, on the tables on the far side of the room. So after the formal program's over, please go take a look. And I want to put a plug in for an exhibit over in the Jefferson Building that also has Carol's work in it, Drawn to Purpose. It's worth crossing the street to take a look at that exhibit. So please welcome Carol Tyler. Thank you.
Thank you. Hello, everybody, and thanks for making the trip out here to the Madison Building today. It's nice to see everyone. This is such a beautiful building, and I love libraries. I love the idea of being at the Library of Congress, and I want to thank you so much for inviting me to be a part of this. It's terrific. So, yeah, we'll do this PowerPoint now. Okay, I'm going to try to be relaxed as much as possible. Although I'm a little bit nervous. This is a biggie, the Library of Congress. People have said, woohoo, because it is a deal. Anyway, comics to a T. So, as you heard in the intro, yes, I am an autobiographical cartoonist. And I've been doing this for, 40-something years, maybe, I don't know, sort of, I guess. I work with my family members. This is my daughter up there on the left. You see her a lot in Late Bloomer as a little tot. This is my husband, Justin Green, the author of Binky Brown, Miserable, over a cup of coffee and life. And that's my core family you see there. My original family, that would be my brother, sister, my other little brother, me, I'm in the middle, and my mom and dad. And I've spent most of my career telling stories about this crew. One of the first stories about the family was, in fact, one of the first stories I ever did was this one called Uncovered Property. And it features Mom, Dad, Jenna Joe, Jimmy, and the dog, like I showed in the picture before. Thank you for pointing this out. This story I did, the Hannah story, which was about my sister's accidental death in 1947. I did this in 1993. I think it was published in 94, and it was named as being on the top 100 cartoonists of the 20th century. I was very honored about that. It's not here in your collection. You got to get a copy of The Job Thing. It's everybody's favorite. This is where I have a little problem, though, because I put the word shitty on the cover. Stories about shitty jobs, because at the time I kept saying, the jobs are shitty. What other word could there possibly be? But as I've kind of matured and gone through life, it's kind of difficult to say, oh, and I'm a distinguished cartoonist, and here's my book about shitty jobs. Just the wrong word, but I don't know how else to describe it. But even in The Job Thing, which was about these terrible jobs I've had, that we've all had, the image you see, the cartoon you see, is about my in-laws at the time. Or they weren't in-laws at the time, they were my first set of in-laws. There's been many. Okay, I was in this group called Twisted Sisters, which was Aileen and Diane, and there's Phoebe Gleckner in the middle, Aileen Crum, Diane Newman, and that's me in the vest. I was wearing a vest because until maybe the turn of the 2000, I never wore a bra, and so I wanted to kind of cover up a little bit. So that's me in the vest with a glass of wine going, ooh, boy, hope I'm covered. And that's that men cover. Late Bloomer. I wanted to do a collection. This was in like 2005. I wanted to put together all the stories that I'd done when I was Late Bloomer, as a collection of all the stories I did while I was raising Julia. And felt like it was coming late because it was I was in my late 40s, early 50s. And this was Kim Thompson's idea at Fantagraphics. Let's call it Late Bloomer. So that became the title. It's a collection of things like Anatomy of a New Mom, which is on display over there. A page from Migrant Mother, where my kid is out of control at an airport, and I had a bad infection. And but one of the things I did here was I was really proud to try to work panels in such a way that it moved the eye in a unique way around the page. We always read from upper left to lower right, and I wanted to do this kind of flow technique with the moving the eye the same way that she was running around the airport. Yep, that's our family. That's me and Justin and our kid Julia, and this is in a story called The Outrage. And I have me as a horrible entity, and he's an old armadillo, and our little kid is going, oh, stop it, you know. Kids try to get in the middle. But I use animal personification a lot in Soldier's Heart. Yeah, this is I'm not afraid to say anything in comics. I never have been. And this is a panel from The Outrage where I had this child, and I felt like she was just, I hate to say it, but she was just like on me all the time. And I came to a point, now they call it postpartum psychosis. But at the time, nobody was talking about this, so I did. And I wrote it in this, wrote about how I saw these knives on the table. I got freaked out and threw them out the window, really, and tried to collect myself. So this was very common. Many women have thanked me for bringing this to the attention. This was before, what's her name did. I did this in print. Here's my new book, Fab Four Mania. Woohoo! So much fun. Oh gosh, we'll talk about that later. But first, I do want to talk about Soldier's Heart because it is the book that took most of my cartooning career. It took me 10 years to do this book. It began as 3 separate books. A lot of people think that Soldier's Heart down here, which is You'll Never Know Book 3, is the Soldier's Heart here, but it's not. This was Gary Groth trying to make sure that the title of the book had the right for new audience. So You'll Never Know, the title comes from my parents' sweetheart song when they met. And there's also other references to not knowing what the heck was going on with my dad and my parents in their lives. And as children, we always look to our parents, and they're so big and awesome. And I always had questions about what was going on with them. The first book had a wood cover because I really wanted to focus on my dad's building trades and his workshop stuff. The second one is more about the collateral damage or the difficulty it took on my mom and the rest of the family. That's why it had a lace kind of background. And then Granite, because there was so much of book 3 where we come to D.C. There's so much about the story that's written in stone. So it started like this, where one day I picked up the phone and all I heard was rivers of blood. I was like, Dad, what? Oh, what? Because at that time, my dad never really communicated well. In fact, my whole life, he just wasn't much of a, we weren't close. He was there. He did his job. He was great. Give me a kiss. Yeah, give me a kiss over here. Oh, okay. But he was not a smooth dude. He'd never say, come here and tell me about your day or anything like that. And my mom had a stroke, and he had nobody to talk to. So he called me up and said this. So I right away grabbed a notebook and started writing down everything he said, citations, North African, all this kind of stuff. I didn't know what this meant. Because my knowledge about, I knew he was in World War II, I knew about the medals, or that there was some, I didn't know any of that stuff that you see there. Patches, I didn't know what any of that meant. Now I know, of course, because I researched. And he had a photograph album, and all the pictures in there were pretty much funny. I've had a lot of people tell me that they get the funny, fun stories from their dads or grandfathers about the war, when in truth, he was pretty raging angry. And most of the time, especially when he got older, and the older he got, and especially towards the end of his life, he got more and more into these fits of rage that in this panel, the panel before this, my mother is terrified because he's tearing the house apart. And she calls me up and says, help, come over. He's going crazy. He's going mad. And he gave me the book. I'd asked him if I could please borrow that booklet of photographs, and he forgot he gave them to me, and he thought I stole them. So he was tearing the house apart looking for them. And I knew I couldn't tell a story about Dad without telling a story about Mom, Julia, our child, Justin and I's child. There's Justin, and Dad. And if you and me, if you look at the photograph here, look at the look on his face, because I had just given him the 365 Days of World War II book, and that photograph says it all. This was the hardest thing for him to have to deal with. It was going to take a lot of driving, along with note collecting and phone calls. That was my little driving companion baby. And they lived on the other side of Indiana, and I show their house like you see there. I lived at that time in Oakley in Cincinnati, and I show the building like this. And this is kind of a map of the state of Indiana. Cincinnati is right close to the state line, and they lived on the other state line towards Illinois. And so I-74 and I-70 were my buddies. I just drove up and down that road. It was a 4-hour drive back and forth, and I often had to go at various times, but without notice. But I usually went every 10 days, 2 weeks, maybe about twice a month to see them for about 10 years in trying to get this stuff together. There's my house where I ended up moving to in Cincinnati, and there's a drawing of my neighborhood, my street. There's always football playing going on. I ripped out my lawn because I didn't want to mow. I planted all that. Oh, that's my studio up there. You see where the American flag is, and it's a 2-family, and I did the whole book up just by those windows. So let's get started. Writing comes first when you do a big story of any kind. Of course, you get your idea, and some of them come in the middle of the night, and some of them you map out in, I used anything, yellow pages, backs of envelopes, anything I could find. I did a lot of research. I had to read books and learn to read these World War II maps. I learned all this information about what these campaigns and generals and official duty booklets and everything. Oh gosh, this is just the tip of the iceberg. I have at least 10 stacks of just the note-taking, just papers that overwhelm the box, and that's just the notes. And then there's little artifacts like that sheet music that has the music to my parents' love song, You'll Never Know. There were so many layout challenges to this book because I am a person that I'd be a good DJ. I don't like repeating formats, songs, anything. So I had to change it up. I feel like I have to change it up all the time. And at one point I had it out on adding machine tape. I thought, well, I'll try. I wrote on the wall. I don't have any pictures of the wall because it's since been painted over, but I would write on the wall some of these things, and then I got into having these big sheets of paper, and I'd list everything up, and then I'd go in with a red pen and pick out the things I thought were important, and then I connected pages together. This isn't trying to figure out, because I knew some of the story. I knew the outcome. I knew where I wanted to go with the story. And I knew a lot of stuff. It was organizing and getting all the ducks in a row. Post-it notes, sometimes they're helpful. Yeah, I'll use those. I did anything I could to try to pull this together. This is a big, giant sheet of some kind of, it's about this big, and I just drew the double spreads of all the pages, and that mark through it means accomplished. And in this one, you'll see like orange Post-it notes and yellow Post-it notes. It was something like, maybe orange meant, you know how in the book I have just the military part. I talk about just his story, him telling me, then we went up over here and I got a casa in Italy. So whenever it's just him telling the military story, that was orange. And then I think the pink down here might have been Kid Crisis. And then I had, because you have to understand, I was telling Mom and Dad's story from World War II. I was telling Dad's story from World War II. I was telling my parents' story now as elderly people. I was also talking about how that folded into my life now. So I had my kid now, at the time she was 12, 13, my older parents now, but then me as a kid, my parents as a kid, so we're talking about really looking back at all of these decades, trying to juggle that and seamlessly pull it through because of the story that I wanted to tell. Eventually, yeah, great, I got this table and just gridded it off and put all, I think this is book 2. I don't know why there's an adding machine there, because, I don't know. But on the wall in the background is the configuration of why a dog wags their tail the way it does. The other day I was looking at that. It's like, what is that? Oh, yeah, this means I'm really happy or something like that. The book took over my life. It took over my house. Kim Thompson insisted that we work with some sort of clarity he needed to know. Because the whole book, I would do it, I'd scan it, and I'd send it through the mail, through some kind of server thing to over the internet. So I never, in the old days, you would do artwork like some of the early work you see over there. I would do artwork, and then you'd box it up, tape it up, take it to FedEx, ship it, and then they'd receive it. So I never once walked into Fantagraphics graphics department. It was all done by spreadsheet and file names and file numbers, and I forgot to put numbers in those 3 You'll Never Know books, but I did put numbers in The Soldier's Heart. But this is all a configuration of that. All right. You start drawing with a pencil. I got one in my hair right here today. I use a yellow number 1 Ticonderoga and a good old pencil sharpener. I work on Strathmore 500 series plate paper. The work starts like that and ends up looking like that. Let's have an ink party. Woohoo! Because I custom mixed the colors I would need. You see Magic 50s, blood, I think there's tank, underline color, my mom's hair, redhead, different, any color I needed. I custom mixed. In fact, I had 53 colors that I worked with and made a chart. So that, I need mom's hair. Okay, that's going to be, and I'd look at the chart and I'd know which one of those little containers would have the color I was looking for. Kind of bonkers. And I drew everything with these 2 vehicles, the pen and this brush. The brush made the distance. The whole book I did with the one brush. It's a Winsor Newton Series 7 1. And the pen points are 788 Esterbrook. I was so terrified. Oh, all those pens you see over there, ignore them. Some of them have application, but mostly I did those. But I was so terrified I was going to run out of pen points that I cornered the market on eBay of 788s. So I own them all. If you have them, they're mine. I bought boxes and boxes of them because I was so afraid. This is one of the first drawings I did, and I was so nervous about how it was going to look, how I was going to do this. And I thought, well, what you do when you do any kind of story is you start with what you know and you start with what you want to do. And I really like drawing objects and stuff. So this was my dad's collection of toxic materials that in the book I talk about. He's having chemo, and I tell the lady, you should have just, this is Mr. Toxic. And I tell this story about how he had all of these horrible, horrible things. And they were going to be moving. And I said, Dad, you can't take this stuff to the new place. Come on, this is stupid. You're not going to be taking benzene and lead and all this stuff. Oh, that's my stuff. Keep your hands the hell away from it. And I said, no, you're not. I'm not going to allow it. You're not taking it. So I put it all in the back of his Cadillac that he started with a screwdriver and ran it to the toxic place. And they were like, oh, yeah, lady, just put it over there. Okay. So then I went home. It's in the book. I ran back, and I was like, oh, wait, I forgot. There's a couple. There was one more, something that was oozing out on the sides, eating through the canister. So I thought, I'll just run this back to the toxic place and the dump. I go back there, and they went, oh, yeah, you need to go down here, and then when you get way down to the back of the yard, you take a left, and there's 3 buildings. It's the last final building. It's back in the corner. And I went, ooh, okay. So these buildings are empty, right? And this is at some kind of dump, and I drive all the way back, and I go all the way back there, and there in this huge big warehouse building in the corner is this little pile of stuff with caution tape all around it, like stay back, don't come near it. It was like, it made me sadder than anything to see it that way. The other challenge was, how am I going to draw these people that I know what they look like, but I also have an image of them in my mind's eye? So I had to tell everybody to get over it. These people may not look like you exactly. Don't hold me to account on that. It was so complicated, I had to make custom furniture to accommodate the pages and the steps that I'd have to take in between. It looks like a wreck because it is. But I made tilt-up tables. I made, my saw, and I got those skills. Just plywood, just try to think of what I needed. Build shelves for things like fake army men and stuff like that. So also this is funny on the wall. At the time, I thought I need some guiding principles. So my mom, with her stroke, was able to bang out, "Carol, you'll ever know that I love you, Mom," because she knew the book was called You'll Never Know. But see how it all is kind of stuck to the right because of her stroke. And my theory was, I need family support, plant-based diet, exercise, and all this stuff. Good sleep. My dad's theories are smoke, drink, do everything wrong, hope you're forgiven, forget about it. So here's some of the layout configurations. To tell Dad and Mom's story, I went to this kind of office supply look from the 40s. I noticed that all the paper had this kind of double black and red line thing. I got some stamps to do the numbers. And then I would do 4 across, and this is the fourplex. And since it's Kid Crisis, it's in black and white, and everything is outlined in red. 6-packs. I made a book that has a lot of 6-packs. It's not just random crazy stuff. I got an order here. A 6-pack means there are 6 panels on a page. And if I'm looking back, I often did the wavy line, like from the old photograph technique. Or sometimes I would put a strip between the panels, or sometimes I would actually put the 1/4-inch gutter between the panels, margins, sorry. And this is a variation on a 12. So 1 and 2 are together. This is about a trip to the archives in St. Louis, and they wouldn't let my dad in. They wouldn't let my mom in to see his own records. I had to go through Freedom of Information Act. It was crazy. You can read about it in the book, but this is 12. This is a variation on the 4 where what I wanted to do was show me talking to them. And I put them in color, and I'm over here in black and white because I had just come out of a Kid Crisis thing. And down the middle is the destination. I was asking Dad to come to the memorial. He's like, "What? I don't want to go there." And I said, "Yes, you do. Come on. I got a personal invitation here from Tom Hanks." He said, "Who's Tom Hanks?" And my mom is, with her stroke, she's thinking, "Hanks, a star. Let me think. Private something." I'm like, "Oh, no, he's that silver screen dude." Okay, here's Hanks. "Please join me in honoring the achievements of the greatest generation, which includes you, Charlie." My mom's thinking, Ryan? Form letter. Okay, form letter or not. We're going, Dad. I'm contacting an archivist. And like that Marine said, it'll take us a while, but we're doing this. Are you in? Yes, he says, I guess so. And so you see the memorial, the stars, Tom Hanks, and part of the memorial features there. And then my mom, it comes to her. Saving Ryan Seacrest. I always have surprises for you readers in all of my work. Just have to read it closely. Sometimes I would do full-page panels. And for some reason, there's something missing, but I had the pencil drawing behind it. God, I hope this is not a problem. But here we are at the National Archives out in College Park, doing some research. Came up bust. And this is the drawing about how it goes from pencil to ink from the left side, pencil to ink on the right side, and then the double spread of both of them. And what I wanted to show here was the feeling you get when you walk into the World War II Memorial. You get this, you kind of walk down in there, but then you get this uplifting, especially when you walk into the two sides, Atlantic Pacific. And I wanted to pull those beautiful elements that are up in the building structure. I wanted to pull them out into the space. So, And that's how I was just like, oh my God. It's just so moving. And for Dad, too. I took a lot of pictures when we were here and used them. You can see his hat there, him looking. That's all I had, but I had to construct the drawing, you know, kind of in a different way, using the photographic references. I also knew at the back of the book I wanted to have a lady swinging a kid, so I random found a lady and asked for permission and used that for that. This was a made-up, you know, when you're in Indiana and it's bleak and it's Christmas time. There's nothing on the roads but these, I call them prairie pop-ups that anchor freeway off-ramps like rivets on dungarees. And then it was funny because I went to Kroger not too long after, and it was like, I drew that out of my imagination. Sometimes I just make shit up. Sorry for the cussing, but I was trying to convey that everybody that I was highlighting in the book, the 5 of us, all had issues going on in the mind. I wanted to talk about that. And this is a page where before texting or whatever that is, talking, I was trying to show, I drew this before then, I was trying to show a conversation that my mom and my sister and I were having about the time that Dad's Cadillac caught on fire on the way back from chemo. And so I have anything that she says with her green headband in green, my mom's is in red, and mine's in blue, and we're trying to weave together the details of what happened and who was where and what was going on. And this is another example of trying to keep the action flowing. You go from left to right in the first, and then it goes down, and you go across the page backwards the other way, and then it comes back through, and you go through here, because I wanted to show the action of driving across the country, or driving across the state of Indiana. Now this one is very interesting, because there's a panel that starts here, and of course it ends at the bottom right. But what I wanted to do was spell out the thesis of the book. This was the infamous page 5. I was laying out the book. I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do with page 5. I had something that led up to it and everything else behind it. And page 5 just stuck. One morning I woke up. I went, I got it, page 5. Start at the bottom. Dad gets the plywood, puts it in the truck, and then he's going to drive up through the landscape. You see? He drives past the sign that says, not. It's up there, Arby's sign, not. Then there's a tire store that says all, and you see scars. The cars have letters on the top of them, scars. Not all scars. The cow says R. And then in the sky it spells out visible. Not all scars are visible, which was the post-traumatic stress disorder, otherwise known as shell shock for World War II veterans. And some pages I just had to build impact. This is the most stunning statistic I came across, was that if you take the 60 million people that died in World War II and you break that down, that's 25,460 people a day. And can you imagine the 24-hour news cycle dealing with that today? Every day for 6 years. Trouble, and I'm going to apologize in advance because this part makes me cry, but I will go on. So my companion throughout the whole book, baby, one day she was like this, and I realized that I had to put her down, and this was at the same time that it turned out that Mom, at 93, was diagnosed with lung cancer. I mean, good long life, but still, Mom, you know. So now it changed that I didn't have the book done yet, so it changed that I would be caregiving at a 4-hour distance, along with teaching, along with trying to get the book done. Mom had a contribution in the book. I made her because she's the original art person. I mean, gosh, Where do you get things from? I made her sit down and gave her some color, and I said, you got to draw this page, Mom. It's got to be in the book. She's like, no. Why do you have to reveal so much about our personal lives? It's nobody's business. It's like kind of too late for that is what I told her. So she made this drawing, Out of War Came My Children, and she drew this. You can see it goes off to the right because of her stroke. But her 4 living children are on the right side. And then the one who passed away, Hannah, that I told you about from the Hannah story, she's on the left with tears coming out. She said, they're not flowers, they're stars in bloom. See, they were married in 1943, and then she has that, she says that's the fog of war, that splotch below the stars. The trouble with doing family stories is they die on you, and you have to come back to the studio and finish the job. So this particular panel that's in Soldier's Heart, I wrote a date underneath it because she passed away on 2/4/2012. I depicted her here as a manatee. My sister, who was my stalwart helper and fun friend my whole life, who did all my editing, always calling me out for bullshit, although she was a former nun. She never used that word. She thought I cussed too much. I got this call, come here, something's wrong. So I went over there and they put her in the operating room. They found the stage 4 ovarian cancer. This is before my mom passed away. But my sister was also caregiving her daughter with autism and her husband with Alzheimer's. And there's Justin there. We would, I had lots of flowers. Like I said, I ripped out my lawn. I grew roses and stuff. And I was taking flowers everywhere I went now. It started to be, I'd take my art pages and I'd take these flowers to scenes like you see here. And everywhere I went, people were laid out in recliners, sick. I'd have to run these pages back and forth from my house. I did these pages for Soldier's Heart in lobbies, waiting rooms. There's elevators. I got cozy. I finally figured out what the elevator buttons mean, as I rode them so much. Anywhere, doctor's offices, any place, I was just dragging my pages along. Those little tray table things by a table are really good for drawing. I just come in, hey, Mom, how are you doing? I just clear it off and set the pages out and just draw away. Then I got this email from Kim Thompson. He's my editor and publisher of these books. So it's like, oh, gosh. In the meanwhile, at home, my daughter had some sort of goofy, oh, it's horrible. Had to have surgery on her sinuses, and everything was bad. Her boyfriend was a heroin addict. He was sweet, though. I mean, we liked him. He was living with us. But I'd come home, my house would look like this. So I'd be caregiving over here, running up and down the freeway. I'd come home, and there'd be, look at the mayonnaise splotch on the table. Just everything was always chaotic, gross. Look, I'd have to board up the windows in the basement because guys that he owed money to were trying to break in all the time. Or he'd pawn my stuff, so I was taking pictures of everything before I'd go anywhere. This is just the nonsense that was going on in the neighborhood. All these noise and turmoil and crap going on. I see needles everywhere. But my life was either school, at home, trying to clean up that mess, or get on the freeway, take my pages, and go take care of the people. In conditions like this often. Or how about coming to school, starting another semester, and they say, oh, we don't have a classroom for you. How am I supposed to teach? Well, okay, I'll go down. I got the janitor to help me find some tables. I had a pop-up classroom in the hallway. I had to teach in the hallway and hide the stuff every time I drag it back out. This is me. I broke out in this virus all over my body. I couldn't move. I was in bed. I couldn't move. I couldn't lift up my feet. Nothing. Some kind of strange thing. 30 days of fever. I had a fever every single day. And all through this, I'm writing this book about my dad, And he turned. In his mind, I was the enemy. He accused me of stealing his money and all this kind of stuff. I'd come in the house, what do you want now? I mean, he was terrible. But I stayed the course with Chuck. I just kind of put up my Spartan shield. And while I would be making soup and serving it to somebody else. I was pretty much a wreck. My sister thought I looked good here. I said, I don't feel good. But I wasn't going to say anything to her. I could absolutely relate to this guy. But sometimes I'd come home and there'd be a deer in my living room. That's the heroin addict. God bless him. He was really cute. We really liked him. And then a cute new dog showed up on the porch. It was like, hey, yeah. And I was able to get my mom and my sister together to do this, to get to this moment. You have no idea. It involved me driving, fending off my dad, getting a truck, getting mom out of her nursing home into this car and taking her to the hospital. Oh. My sister, bless her heart, such an education stalwart. She had a PhD despite all of her troubles. And here was the day when, just before she passed away, they gave her an emeritus status. And I'm trying to give her my hair. I used it in an art show. I cut my hair off in solidarity. So, yeah, she was on her deathbed, and I had a deadline because I was doing work for Sensei magazine. And so this is a story about, she used to love to swim, and she was a teacher, so this is about me teaching a kid to swim. And then when she passed away, of course, I had a deadline. And before I went to the funeral, I had to come up with this month's installment. So this is about Rosemary Clooney at a park singing, I'll Be Loving You Always. And Dad, we knew he was going to get going. And I knew that Soldier's Heart, that big fat book, was coming out. So I had him do signature cards. And by the way, Georgia, I have a signature card for the library. Dad's last Christmas. He didn't realize it was his last Christmas. I knew that. So kind of lonely. Everybody was gone. So I said, hey, why don't we write down all the people from Mom's, that you can remember, and from Mom's address book, their Christmas card list, on these papers? And so we made this chain. And so he was writing down everybody's name that he could remember. And then I went to a funeral on Tuesday, his funeral, and I got back. I was thinking Tuesday or Wednesday. I got an email from Fantagraphics. Oh, we need the artwork drawing for your dad's, for the cover by Friday. So after all of this, okay, I had to sit down and knock out a portrait of Dad, just put him in the ground. It really does take a toll doing this kind of work. It's really hard. This is the hardest to talk about because when I did this, it's from the Hannah story I told you about, it got to me that my sister had this terrible burn accident. And so I was leaning over the drawing crying, and the drops were falling. I wanted to use red ink, to show the lines. I made these lines. But I was dropping tears on the page, so I took a tissue and I was dabbing it and made that smear technique that you see there. It's from me crying. No wonder I did that Beatles book. Oh, it was time. It was time. My new book is about mourning, though. It's about all this stuff I've been telling you about. Losing everybody, living with a heroin addict. Everything that entailed, the impact it had on my life. It's called The Ephemerata. And I began right after Mom died with kind of, for me, traditional page art, making grids. And this is I've got a bunch of these little booklets that I get at thrift stores and stuff, nonsense books. You probably have one here at the Library of Congress. Hex signs and barn decorations, but I'm asking probing questions about death, and I call it a book report. But I've also been gravitating towards just art with words on it, trying to free myself. You have to understand, 10 years of using 53 colors is very limiting and tough. And so this was when my sister was just at the end It says, these are the only thoughts I have, like the Grim Reaper carrying her off. But still, I'm wondering down here if this is a legitimate drawing. Is it legitimate for me to do this? Maybe I should make a table or something more purposeful, make furniture. I'm very hard on myself. And I also tell my students, and this is true, when you can't do anything else in your life, do a self-portrait. At least your pencil's working. And you know that, what's going on with that head of yours. So I started doing, exploring this new thing, like I got all these objects, and mourning and death. This is my great-grandmother's mourning bonnet. She tended to both Union and Confederate soldiers during the Civil War. They called her the doctor. I have her mourning bonnet. And in this sequence, it comes on me and knocks me down. So much that I have to process. I almost can't function. There's days when I just can't. Because I've got mom and dad's stuff. I got my sister's stuff. I got my own stuff. My best friend down the street, Rose, she passed away. I got a bunch of her stuff. My brother-in-law. Sometimes I just sit there. See, there's Dad's Army uniform. There's Jimmy's bike when he was 7 years old. And this has become kind of an expression of how I feel right now. I'm holding the impossible trident. And there's pain. I'm kind of focused on that, but yet I'm lost in it, in this weird landscape. And this, you know, that Grant Wood painting, Woman with Plants? She's holding the plants. There's nothing coming out of that flower pot. I've been making sculptures out of thorns. I have thorn trees on my property, and doing stories on saw blades. Some of Dad's old saw blades tell us. And then this is from this exhibit. I'm going to show you. We're going to watch it. I'll show you a link in a minute. But these stumps represent all the people I lost in a 3-year period. These were close to me. So finally I got Mom settled. She wanted to be near a young tree. And that's my sister in the basket. I was able to help her with her final wishes, which was to be, she was in the convent years ago. She died. She went back to the convent at the end of her life as an associate. And so my brothers and I distributed her ashes at the sisters' cemetery. I got my dad buried, and in that coffin with him are some tools, a pipe, and that chain of all his friends. Put that in there at the end. This past June, I went back to visit his grave, make sure they had the veteran, his stone. And there it was. And as I was walking up, I thought, oh no, I have nothing to give. I have nothing to bring. You know, whether it be a shot of whiskey or some flowers, but I realized I had a pencil, right? So I wrote on this stone, I did some of the drawings from the book and made a little American flag for him, and I love you, miss you, Dad. And that's his flag flying. I was able to get a house in Kentucky, a farm, with money he got from being a disabled veteran. Because the Cincinnati Zoo is buying my house and I have to move. And so I had to get this other place to get started on, so I got this farmhouse. And there's his flag. And my little companion, Tu, I call her Tu, T-U-E. She's wearing a fascinator, and we're having tea at the royal wedding But bless her heart, she'd just gotten hit by a car a week before. And as she was laying in the street, and I thought, oh God, she's gone. I went up to her, I said, "Two." And she raised her head up and said, "If you can just get me to an emergency vet, I promise I will stay the course with you because you've lost too many people." And then there's Farmer Jones just in there with the truck that we did all the driving with, and St. Francis in the garden from my parents. And they've always had that yellow thing that flops around in the wind. In the farmhouse, which I actually had visions of during my period of mourning, I imagined a space where I can do this work, the ephemerata. And this is the room that I'll be doing this in. I've already started. So now, yeah, I want to show this video. This is my art show that I had with all the pages of the book.
I feel this is one of the best exhibits that the Myers Gallery has really had, and I've come here for years. It's creative, it's innovative, it uses the space well. You want to stay, you want to read.
Well, I think it's wonderful in a variety of ways, but mainly because, I'm a book person, so it's really unusual to see an entire book laid out like this.
What I think about this show is so beautiful is that Carol actually shows every single page of the book that she drew by hand, very meticulously.
I think the other thing that I really like about this exhibit is that the second room. I love the way she's done she's opened her head to the world, which is literally done here with a doorway.
It does kind of feel like you're sort of coming into sort of like a minefield with her, with what she's doing here. The interior acts as her studio, and it also acts as her father's workshop, but kind of beyond that, it really acts as her mind, and the things that are in her mind and preoccupy her mind and her thoughts, and the things that she's thinking about when she's generating her work.
So amazing reading the story and sort of the pathos that she's been through. I mean, the books kind of show that, but seeing it here with all the 3D, objects and found things really kind of packs a punch. I mean, kind of really feel the grief and, what she's been through and what her family's been through. Especially particularly the handwritten stuff on the walls here is just, heartbreaking.
Another thing that I admire is that Carol worked out her personal experience with her family and her father's history by going through all of her life's experiences with him and documenting that and working it through in her own way, telling a story about her dad and her experience with her dad, painting it all, drawing it all, and reporting it all, and working it through. So to me, this is like poetry, it is literature, it is psychology, it is art, it is drawing, and for students this is wonderful to see that an artist can have such a breadth of information that with her own talent of being able to write and being able to draw, work that out. And I feel like that joy that she had doing this book is expressed in this exhibit.
Okay. There you go. There you go. That's all. Goodbye.